Welcome everybody. I'm Nicola Hillary from Transition Network and one of the co-guardians of the Municipality and Transition Community of Practice. This is actually the 7th of our series of hot topic discussion webinars and the end of this particular series. And this one is looking at practical sources of inspiration, tools and resources, because working with communities and municipalities on systemic changes is not easy or straightforward. It's quite complex and sensitive. And so where are the best ideas and the best guidance for the best chance of success? And at the same time, this is in a world where there's just masses of information available. So how on earth do you make sense of it? So to help us with this task, we have 3 co-presenters who are going to get us started. And also, the people who are here, it'd be also great to think about your favourite resources and what do you use and what do you recommend. And then after we've heard from our co-presenters, if you can share those, that would be really interesting to hear. So either get a link ready that you can share in the chat or something that you can share on your screen. So I'm facilitating today. Tommy is the co-host who can help you with if you have any technical issues and with the chat window and all the rest of it. And our presenters today are Mike Thomas, Nenad Maljković and Fyodor Ovchinnikov. And Tommy's going to post some questions into the chat window, which is kind of a check-in to find out who's here. And also, while you're saying who you are and where you're from and what brought you here, it's also a chance to say yes to recording this and making the recording public online, because we need your permission for that. So yes, I hope everyone can see those questions, and as you write your answers, you can see who else is here. And meanwhile, I'll just give you a brief introduction to the Municipalities in Transition project, which started in 2017 with funding from KR Foundation. And this project is all about innovative collaboration between civil society and municipalities for systemic, sustainable change. We collected 70 case studies worldwide, and from looking at those, developed a flexible framework which has been tested in 6 pilots in Spain, in Italy, Portugal, Hungary and Brazil. And there's kind of different elements to this framework, but it's all about building relationship and collaboration between the community and the municipality, getting a good picture of what's going on in your community and taking action where it looks like there's leverage points for change. And also, we've been trying to develop at different levels community of practice to share ideas and learning and support, and that's where we are now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our co-presenters. First of all, to Mike Thomas, who is also from Transition Network. He's our support coordinator. Here you go, Mike.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of all the resources that we have on the Transition Network website, and to just give you a bit of explanation as to how they came about and why they're in the categories they are and how you can access them and what actually exists on there. So what I'm going to do is try and share my screen, which seemed to work earlier. There we go. Can we all see this? Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Okay. So to start off, what we've got on the website now is what we call 7 essential ingredients of transition, and those 7 essential ingredients come out of what was a consolidation of all the transition resources that we had up until a couple of years ago. We looked at all of them. So we had the companion, there was the handbook, there was launch and thrive trainings that were being put on, and then there was the 12 steps of transition. And what we did was we looked at all that, and we decided that based on feedback from trainings and what people had told us in the movement, that we could sort of reduce it down to what were 7 essential ingredients of transition. And what under these 7 essential ingredients, there's a whole range of resources. There's 32 resources altogether, and there are 3 different formats. So some are activities that you can do with a group. Others are like guides, so like guides to decision making or guides to how to run a meeting. So stuff that you would use again and again. And then other stuff is more like info sheets, where they give you information on a specific topic. And they're all Creative Commons. So we specifically made the resources to be as general as possible, so other groups outside of transition could also use them and find them useful. So any of these resources that are on the website, I think can be useful for any group to use, as you'll see when we have a look through them and see what's on there. So they're all based on the Transition Network website. And if you can see now, I'm hovering over Do Transition. So the stuff we're going to look at mainly is the 7 essential ingredients. We also have a How to Start guide, which I can quickly show you. So this is the How to Start Transition. So if you're interested in starting transition in your community. And we have this guide in several languages: English, Italian, French, Japanese, Russian, Hungarian, Chinese, Portuguese, German, and Spanish. And as you see, as I scroll down, you can access the essential guides and stuff. So if we go and look at the 7 essential ingredients, they come under obviously 7 categories. So there's healthy groups, vision, community involvement, networks and partnerships, practical projects, being part of a movement, and reflecting and celebrating. So if you have a look at healthy groups, so one of the things that we saw was really important that came through with the feedback and the trainings and just the general experience of transition was that healthy groups are actually really important for transition being successful. So what we've done is we've gathered, this is probably the biggest section, and we have resources on how to run meetings effectively, decision making, how to get and keep people involved in transition. So how do you find those lead people, and when you do find them, how you're able to keep them involved. So a lot of stuff to think about in there about how people, so they don't just come along once and then don't stay. So there's a lot of thinking in there. Then we've got an overview of how groups develop, which is looking at I'm sure a lot of you've heard it, but the storming, forming, norming, performing sort of model. A guide on how to receive and offer feedback. And under each of the sections, we've also got what we call the more inner transition type activities, which is stuff around sort of psychology and how people interact with each other and how we can avoid burnout and stuff like that. So we've got things on becoming stress busting experts, whole activity around group and personal sustainability, and then like small activities that you can do in a transition, activities that you can do in meetings such as check-ins and feedback and reflection and stuff like that, which you can build into your general meetings. And then there's also a virtual teams guide and a guide on shared governance and working in circles. So that's healthy groups. And then the second one was vision, because vision we thought is always really important that a group has a shared vision. And so there's a couple of resources which we've produced which enable people to come, if worked through in the group, it creates a shared vision that you can all sign up to. So we have Vision in a Post-Transition Future, and that's an activity where you can develop your own unique vision for your community. Producing a timeline which basically helps you to make that vision a reality. And then understanding and integrating inner transition into your vision. So stuff to think about how you integrate that side of things. And then there's another one, another activity, which is looking from behaviors to belief, which is looking at how you how you create the sort of ideas of the world that you want to see. So following on from that, there's community involvement. And community involvement obviously is really important for transition. And if you notice at the start of each section, you can see here that we have a section which, some text which explains why we think it's important. So for example, involve and engage in your community enables you to raise awareness about transition, help people to understand the issues that transition addresses, shows people how you can make a difference in their community, and inspires new people to get involved. And again, we have a series of guides here. So there's one to planning and putting on events, so everything you need to know to do that. How to run open space, which is a technique where people can come up with a load of different topics that you can discuss in groups. A short info sheet, which gives you a load of examples of fun things that you could do. Big list activity, that's an activity which helps you to look at all the people and the different groups within your community to decide who you can work with and how and what level of support they may give to transition. And then the final guide in this one is there's 7 ingredients for a just, fair and inclusive transition, which is looking at how you engage with different elements of your community on a more practical level. And then we move on to networks and partnerships. And networks and partnerships are obviously really important in terms of getting stuff done in your community. And the reason we split that is that into 2 sections is that there's networks which are more around how you engage with the different actors and groups within your community. So in order for you to sort of support what's already going on. And that's probably a more light touch way, you know, this isn't like doing joint projects together necessarily, or doing big pieces of work, which is why we then created the how to create partnerships guide, which is when you're thinking of doing more in-depth work, or you're thinking of entering into a partnership with another group to deliver something in your community. So that gives you a load of things to think about in order to make sure that everyone understands what's going on and what's expected of each other. And it's a really useful document to use when you're entering into a partnership in the beginning, as well as gives you information on how to deal with issues if things come up, problems happen. And combined with that is there's the building bridges, which is another inner transition activity, which is about deepening your work in partnerships with other people in those groups. So how to build more strong and deep working relationships. And then we have a section on practical projects, which there's a guide on developing practical projects from scratch. There's a small practical projects for the initiating group info sheet. So that's like really quick things that you can do when you're first starting up transition, or you want something, you know, what we would call quick wins. So things that you can do really quickly to show that transition's having an impact. And then there's the task process relationship in a transition guide, which is sort of unpacking a bit about how tasks and processes, so how you can make sure that stuff is being delivered in a good way and understanding how that happens. And then we have part of a movement, which is, this section is probably more specific to transition in general, because we have lots of ways that people can engage with transition. So we have a guide which basically goes through all the ways that you can connect with the transition movement, explaining the structure and the fact that there's hubs internationally, and there's like loads of different ways that you can be kept up to date with what's going on. Also, actually, if you notice at the bottom of each section, we also have frequently asked questions. So if you click on the little arrow, you can see the answers to these questions. And then there's also connections and impact in a transition activity. And that one's looking at how you're, you know, exploring how your relationships influence and change the world. And then, sorry about that. Finally, you have reflect and celebrate. In transition, we recognise that celebration is a really important thing. It's something that a lot of groups don't tend to do because they're really busy thinking about the next thing. So
you can't see it anymore, Mike. Do you want
can you?
No.
You stopped sharing, I think.
Don't know why that's happened, whatever. I'll try again. There we go. It's because the little toolbar at the top is hiding over my web tabs. I'm trying to. Anyway, yeah. So we have under the Reflect and Celebration guide, we have a guide to putting on an annual celebration. There's a really in-depth guide to monitoring and evaluation. So this is really important if you want to look at the impact you're actually having and ways that you can monitor that. And then there's action reflection in a transition. And that's sort of understanding the whole process of, doing something and then reflecting on it and that cycle and how that can help you make things more effective and better next time you do them. So all these 7 essential ingredients then go into form the basis of the transition health check. And the transition health check is a tool which you can use as a group to sort of self-assess how you're doing in terms of each of those 7 essential ingredients. So if we have a look, this is based at transitioninitiative.org and is available in several different languages. As you can see here, I think we've got about 16 different languages. And when you go into it, this is the English version, there's at the start, there's a guide to telling you how to do it with your group. And then you'll notice that each section, so we have one on how to start transition, and then there's healthy groups, and if each one of the sections refers to an essential ingredient. So if you look at like healthy groups, for example, you can see we have a series of statements, and then there's a pie chart here, and you would put between 1 and 5 how well you're hitting that target. So if you're doing really well, saying our group has clear and agreed aims and objectives, you would give yourself 4 or 5. If that was something you were lacking in and it wasn't something you were doing in your group, you would maybe do 1 or 2. And the idea of this is that it prompts a lot of conversations within the group. It's not a test. It's not like to say that if you score really highly, you're doing really well or anything like that. It's really a reflection tool to help groups to sort of identify gaps where they might not be doing stuff in order for them to see whether that's an issue. And it's really useful because it helps you to, as a group, to sit down together and reflect on what you've been doing over the past year. And because each area, as we can see, like vision, community involvement, links to the essential ingredients. So for example, if you wanted to do if you did community involvement and you found that there was some areas that you wanted to improve on, you can then go back to the community involvement section and check out the resources and info sheets and guides and use them in order to help address what it is you want to do in your community. So that's pretty much it in terms of all the resources that we've got. The one couple of other things that we do have is there is a guide to doing transition in your university. So if you're based in the university and you'd like to set up transition within that, there's quite an in-depth guide there which can help you to do that. And we also have the move into core group guide, which is where when you start up transition initially, it's usually a small group of people in there's a period of time where it takes you to develop what's going on and develop your group and things like that. And then sometimes you want to move on to do more larger scale things. So moving to a core group gives you some hints and tips on how you can structure your group in order to do that and how you can manage the transition from that initiating process to being a more established group in your community. And that's it. And I'll pass back to Nicola.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. And hello to the other people who've joined the call since we started. Lovely to see you all. I'm going to now move to our second co-presenter, who is Nenad, who's a permaculture and transition entrepreneur and a network weaver for the International Group of Economy Practitioners. So, Nenad, what feast of resources do you have for us today?
Feast of resources. Yeah. So as I explained at the beginning, I'm actually hoping that I'll be able to share something helpful for people here and people that will be watching this. And I'm actually not very sure how helpful that can be, because the resources are plenty and omnipresently and available, but without some focused attention and time, nothing is going to be useful out of these resources. So I just want to emphasize at the beginning, whatever you use as a resource or as a source of inspiration requires time and attention, which we are all under a lot of pressure in our modern life. So it's kind of difficult. Yeah. So I actually try to make a top 5 list. And of course, that's not all. And this is top 5 list of self-learning resources for change agents. I think it's safe to say that we can say transitioners, we can say social innovators. That's all more or less the same role. People that are moving things forward within some organizations or networks of or wider society, change agents. Yeah. And the question was how to make sense out of all this and how to actually filter to reduce this overload. Yeah. So I guess one way to make sense is to put some time into reading and reflecting individually. But much better way to make sense is to actually engage in conversations with other people, conversations like this. I mean, synchronous, in person or on video. And sometimes conversations on social media. That's very, very useful. Yeah? And I guess filtering has 2 aspects. One way to filter is to maybe automate what kind of information can come to you. But I noticed that the best filter for me is through people I trust. Talking to people I trust or following people I trust on social media, that's the best way that very useful information and resources comes towards me. And for example, I was very reluctant to use LinkedIn for quite a long time, but since I started to use LinkedIn, my network there is providing really, really useful resources. So sometimes social media can be really good and useful. So over to this top 5 list. I also try to share screen. Let me see how how this will work for me. Yeah, so top 5. It doesn't work that way.
We did see it. It worked for us.
Yeah, but I wanted to move it. Anyway, number 5 is a resource that is in a way similar to what Mike just shared. It's a website with quite a lot of interesting content. It's about sociocracy. I call it, or community of practice that is maintaining calls it a practical guide. And this particular variant of sociocracy is called Sociocracy 3.0. And if you open the website, one of the very interesting things there is a map of patterns that are useful for all kinds of contexts for collaboration in teams, organizations, and networks. And basically the idea with this practical guide is to use what you need depending on the context. So whenever you want to improve something in your collaborations, you can look here if there is something useful that can help you. The whole content is divided into certain chapters, and you can drill down to individual patterns, and individual patterns are very briefly explained in form of bullet points and sometimes in forms of diagram. So that's my recommendation number 5. Works instead of some fancy organizational handbook. Recommendation number 4 is relatively recent discovery for me. It's a website and community of practice of network weavers. So this is exactly what I'm doing in a way in different contexts. And that website called Network Weaver is also offering a range of free or low-cost resources. So here is that resources page. I'm going to share links with everybody, so it will be available. No need to take notes. And some of the resources are just one-pagers. Some of the resources are, for example, collections of posters or toolkits or glossaries. And there is also a comprehensive handbook, Network Weaver handbook, that I would really recommend. So that's a resource number 4. Resource number 3, let me see what I have here, is called Commons Transition Primer. And it is particularly interesting and relevant for transitioners, not because of that transition word in the title, but because of commoning and commons. Basically, what we do in transition is we are commoning social innovation and social change. And the ultimate commoning is taking care of global planetary ecosystem as a commons. And Commons Transition Primer, which you can get in PDF or also online form, is a very, very good introduction into the whole area. And I guess Peer-to-Peer Foundation is the most known organization or network that is associated with promoting commons transition. Yeah. So this is a PDF version available on Transition Network International website, developed by people from Peer-to-Peer Foundation. And I really recommend it. It's very well curated and very well designed, and not that long to read. So that would be resource number 3. Going more up Resource number 2 is, well, two things in a way. There is really rich website about systemic thinking and systems innovation and systemic approach to changes. Really rich content, so you can look for really all kinds of ideas and inspirations there, and the complete content is free, so it's not paid courses, and you can have it also as a video tutorials and also as a reading material. Yeah. And in the context of systems innovations and systemic thinking, what is particularly useful, at least to me, as a sense-making framework, is a framework called Kinefin, developed by Dave Snowden. The best practical use of this kind of framework is, I guess, context evaluation and probably strategic thinking, and also practical thinking in collaborations and organizations. Just a second, I think I'm not showing what I wanted to show. For some reason, I was not able to show this diagram of Kinefin network. It will be shared. Yeah. And finally, resource number 1 is not online. It's not electronic, but just ordinary and plain book. Quite a recent book, published by Inspire Collective in New Zealand a month ago, I think. Yeah. Of course, it's available in PDF as well. What is interesting is this book is co-authored by 10 or 12 authors that are offering their years-long experience in collaborative development of the different social change initiatives with maybe more business-oriented approach, unlike what we do. But what is particularly interesting for me in this book is essay number 4, where transition network is mentioned among movements that are emerging globally and are starting to connect. So this particular essay is about movement of movements, or global movement, and explains what is common, what are the common denominators among these movements, transition town movement being one of those. And these 5 common elements are the sharing and collaborative economy, circular economy and ecological activism, social entrepreneurship and impact, open source and decentralization, and digital nomadism, or generally digitalization, and freelancer collectives. Not all 5 elements are equally present in every single movement mentioned here. The list of movements is included, also transition network. And there is an interesting diagram where you can see that transition network is here in this corner. The horizontal axis is more activist on one side and more business friendly on the other side. And the vertical axis is less techy and more techy. So transition is more activist and less techy, according to this diagram. Yeah. I find this particularly useful because I think we are moving to some kind of a convergence, pressured, of course, by climate and environmental tragedy on the planet and urgency. Yeah. And this is actually quite connected with what Fyodor is going to talk about, because it is about how to not only connect, but also how to collaborate and maybe coordinate activities globally. Yeah. So as I said, I try to offer something helpful. It won't be helpful without putting some time and attention into it. And I can answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Nenad. That was fascinating, but also inspiring enough that perhaps we will put some time into looking at those resources. So that's great. Thank you. So our final co-presenter is Fyodor Ovchinnikov from the Institute of Evolutionary Leadership. And what mysteries does he have to tell us about today?
Thank you. It's great. So, hello everybody. It's great to be with all of you. I've been, so basically we've been collaborating with Transition US since I guess 2014 or something, in different ways. It's a great pleasure to be in the online space with Transition UK, and thank you, Nenad, for inviting, and Nicola for organizing and listening to Nenad's recommendation to invite me. I will try to keep it brief, and also just a disclaimer again, similar to Nenad, what I'm going to share with you is something that is my personal perspective, coming from my personal work, that some people like Nenad, for example, find helpful. And it's also evolving. So please just take it with a grain of salt and see what resonates. Let me just share my screen. Share screen. Okay, so can you see this? Everybody can see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so I'm going to talk about bubble sharing and bubble surfing for cross-network learning. Let me start by sharing some personal experiences with this phenomenon that Nenad just described. I've been feeling very strongly over the last couple of years the convergence that wants to happen. I've also been part of quite a lot of conversations of people trying to create meta networks. So networks of networks that would really bring different networks together and communities of practice together to catalyze change. In many of those conversations, I felt a little bit uncomfortable with what was going on, and I was trying to articulate why. And at some point, my best guess was that we've been spending so much time trying to figure out how to move from a loose network to a community of practice that is more aligned, that has shared practices, that where learning increases exponentially, where everybody understands each other and works towards the same purpose, so that we actually, in many cases, have trouble loosening those attachments and trying to try something new. Because when we deal with global movements, oftentimes we're different, and we have different language, we have different understanding of what's right, and we have different identities, and our time and attention is limited. So when we try to create one global community of practice and really converge around something, this is neither healthy nor realistic. So here are some of the potential pitfalls of meta networks that I've noticed. Strive for comprehensiveness. So have you ever seen a group of people coming together and trying to map all the change initiatives for almost 8 billion people on the planet? And it's okay to try to put, it's helpful to really put together knowledge about different change initiatives that people in the room currently have. This is usually very enlightening and inspiring and helpful. But people sometimes feel uncomfortable until they kind of have this illusion of having covered everything. And when a new thing comes into the loop and they try to it kind of is almost this jealousy or almost this feeling, oh my God, these folks are doing amazing things over there and we didn't know about that. Oh, we feel bad about it, right? And these things are actually signs of hope and the signs of things simultaneously popping up in different places of the world. So when we have a new thing that we haven't known about, we should embrace it, and we should always know that there are many, many other things we will never know about, however great we are and connected and impactful. Strive for comprehensiveness is something pretty limiting that I found out. So objectivity, also what's the right thing to do, right? Again, I've witness groups arguing about strategy, and they're not communities of practice. They're actually trying to figure out a shared understanding of how the world works, and I don't think they actually need to do that in this setting. So it might be necessary and helpful for community of practice, again for networks of networks. Some diversity of solutions or attitudes might be very helpful and healthy. Shared language, the same thing. Camps of flourishing versus the camp of flourishing versus the camp of thriving. We need to have a thriving world. No, we need to have a flourishing world, and then all this different linguistic stuff that is going on. Again, for community of practice, there could be deep conversations about which word to use, but for networks of networks, actually the contexts are different, and it would be great, just holding multiple terms for different things and understanding the nuances and differences, but also kind of allowing for that diversity. Shared ontology, the universe is guiding us versus we're humanists and everything is based on science and stuff like that, right? So even if people use the same language or shared practices, once they realize that their kind of deep understanding of the world is different, there is usually this tension that is created that doesn't help cross-network learning. So dominating identity and continuous engagement, that is something that I've seen a lot. So basically, when we try to create a meta network, there is this sense of, oh, okay, so now we will be the meta network, and anybody else who is trying to create a meta network either need to join us, or they will be kind of a competitor of meta network. And also if you have your own identity, then our identity should prevail over your identity, right? For example, if Transition US joins a meta network, then Transition US should consider itself part of that meta network, and tell everybody that they're part of that meta network, and all this identity plays. Continuous engagement, again, in communities of practice, it just organically happens in many ways, and there are practices to support continuous engagement. With meta networks, it's very limiting because it only invites people who are willing to engage continuously, and it puts some pressure on people to engage continuously. That is not always organic. With meta networks, instead of trying to create infrastructure and engagement practices, I found that protocols of engagement or protocols of learning are more helpful, so that people can check in with each other and part ways as soon as they want, right? And then out of that, some deeper commitments and deeper engagements and actual networks and actual communities of practice may emerge or may not emerge, right? And these are some of the barriers, I would say, that I've encountered in these groups trying to create meta networks, because because of these mental models that we've developed for deepening our engagement and our commitment. I think that for the global transition to happen, we don't have to have a shared ontology and shared language and dominated identity and continuous engagement and claim comprehensiveness and objectivity. It's just, we don't need that, and it's not realistic. So what if we stop striving for comprehensive and comprehensiveness and objectivity, embrace our own evolving perspective and share it with the world? That was a guiding question. Basically, I remember last year when Kevin Jones from Impact Hub San Francisco asked me to share some, just like you're doing here, some resources or some trends that I observed. I caught myself trying to be objective and comprehensive and trying to really put weights on what should be on the top and what not doesn't. And then I just thought about all these conversations about meta networks I've been having, and said, hey, look what, stop. I don't have to be objective. I don't have to be comprehensive. I can claim my subjectivity. I can claim the limitations that I have with my perspective. And I just said, hey, look, this is what I see from my own bubble, in my own bubble, from my own perspective. And I'm just putting it out there, and I don't think about the audience. I think about my universe and how I describe things out there. And then if you have questions, I'm happy to talk, but basically that's it. And take whatever is helpful and don't take anything else. And that's how bubble sharing came about, all right? So Nenad actually chose the hashtag. He was one of the first people responding to that, and the invitation there was for other people to share their bubbles as well. So unlike traditional ways of conveying messaging, think about your audience, right? And try to really deliver something that will fit other people's context. Bubble sharing invites you to just embrace your own context and invite other people to explore your context, your own universe in your own context, instead of trying to convey a specific message for specific impact. So it's really just creating a list of observations or resources or themes that you notice, or ideas or insights, and just sharing it out there with disclaimer that it's just your personal bubble, right? And again, continuing that theme, there is no, so you're not expecting a particular impact because you don't know what impact might emerge, and you don't impose it on people, so nobody has to read that, or right? So, but people can actually scroll through it and see if they would like to take something out. Bubble surfing is checking out other people's bubbles, and there are certain protocols of bubble surfing as well, right? So, it's not about creating a comprehensive map. It's not about monitoring all the key things, which could be helpful in some very specific, for some very specific reasons, and there could be, boundaries that you define for, monitoring stuff and keeping track of things. But bubble surfing, it's really going beyond that and checking out some random stuff that's out there. And once we do that, the idea is that we'll be able to facilitate this learning because we don't have pressure, right? Because we kind of allow for this randomness to come about. Because otherwise, when we feel pressure, then our kind of defensive mechanisms are working, and we only filter what we already know. So the invitation of bubble surfing is to approach each bubble without judgment, and at the same time take it lightly without any obligation to engage with whatever requires a lot of effort, unless it evokes genuine curiosity, right? So we don't have to read everybody's bubble and like study it in detail, but we can actually see what resonates with us at the very moment and explore it further. Right. So bubble surfing practices: read lightly to see what catches your eye. Quickly grasp vocabularies, identities, and context. So instead of trying to create a shared language for a meta network, just try to see, like, to challenge even if there is the same word, like development, for example. I found colleagues really arguing about development when one colleague used it in the international development context and another colleague used it in the developmental psychology context. And they were arguing whether the word development was colonial or not. They just meant completely different developments. Quickly grasping these vocabularies, identities, and contexts, that's kind of a skill that can be very helpful for cross-network learning. So don't expect the person to actually present things in your context. Just go and learn their context and appreciate it for what it is. Identify overlaps to define common ground. And there is something that might immediately resonate. You say, yeah, I feel that way too, and I know this works for me, and that's not new information, right? So, but that is a common ground. Identify what you can learn right away. So there are some things that completely fit our current worldview, but that we didn't know. Like, for example, Nenad shared something about systemic change on this website. Okay, I have a framework to understand that. I didn't know about this resource. I can learn it. Boom, just do it. Identify what you have questions about to keep the inquiry going. So in some cases, I might say, well, sociocracy is great, but I also know like that holacracy is connected to sociocracy, and I see some failures of holacracy. So I wonder if sociocracy is evolving in a different way, and it could be useful for certain kind of things, right? So I have an inquiry here. I'm not necessarily ready to learn that thing right away and apply it, but I want to learn more about, deeper context of that, right? And then identify that's a typo here. Identify what you think you understand, but don't quite agree with. Hold paradoxes without assuming that we know better, right? That you know better. So basically, identify something that you don't quite agree with, right? And it could be like, okay, I don't agree with this practice, or I don't agree with this worldview, but let me just keep my eye on that and see how this evolves and learn more about it and see why exactly I don't agree and be in dialogue with people. If that is something that is that is important for you, right? There could be something that you don't want to waste your time on, but if there is something that really touches you, then that's how you can approach that. And just quickly, like learning to go through all the steps every time you kind of quickly browse something might really be helpful. And finally, effects of bubble sharing and bubble learning, right? When these bubbles interact, when we just let go of objectivity, and comprehensiveness, we could share more and more lightly. So we could increase the output of information that we share with the universe, because we're not afraid of judgment. And then we can also serve other people's bubbles. And just like in the open space, instead of like compared to a traditional conference, instead of just trying to go through the content that is pretty dominating, try to like lightly see the random combinations that are out there and just engage with them, maybe using some of those protocols, maybe not, and take whatever makes sense at this moment, and also lose an attachment with our own worldview and evolve our worldview as we bump upon different bubbles. Thanks for bubble surfing. So that was my bubble. Here is a link to the post with some more background on that. And if you're ready for bubble sharing, just do this. And that was my piece. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's a really interesting attitude to hold, or an approach that might help us navigate through that world of information, or might even provoke some questions from us today. So thank you all three of you so much for those fascinating presentations. This is everybody's chance now. If you were there at the beginning, I challenged people to share your favourite resource or something that's helped you or that you use or recommend. So I'd be really interested to, if people want to put their hands up, which you can either do like that or you can do it electronically. There's a participants button at the bottom, and then there's a way through that you can put your hand up electronically. So either electronically or normally, if you want to speak. So either if you've got some resources to share with us, or if you've got questions, let me know who wants to speak. Don't all rush at once.
I'll put my hand up to get started.
Go for it, Cheryl.
This is a little bit on the side of a very identifiable named resource, but I have found that the university in my own community is a resource, particularly because our university, Trent University here in Peterborough, Ontario, has a very strong reputation for studies in sustainability, business sustainability, agricultural sustainability, and also in Indigenous knowledge. And Indigenous knowledge tracks point for point with permaculture.
Wow.
And so we're trying to form deeper relationships with our university. For instance, Transition Town has been asked to speak to third-year geography classes, for instance. And we also have contacts now, and have in the past, for doing research projects on increasing our production and consumption of local food. And we share that research with the community.
So it goes both ways, is what you're saying. Yes. So your resource, your source of inspiration might not be an online guide. It might be an actual institution like university.
Yes, I just thought I'd share that because you may live in communities that have universities.
Yeah. Nenad?
Yeah, I would like to show one more slide, if I may, which kind of puts all of this together in our work. It is included in my slide presentation, but I would like to share it now. And it is one of the website, yarhe.com. It's a Canadian, I guess, thought leader that is quite proficient in these things. So this is a diagram that he's sharing quite often, and it is a representation how what we do in small teams and organizations, what we do in communities of practice like MIT or economy practitioners, and what we do in wider society, how all this is embedded in this process that he calls seek, sense, share. And what is particularly interesting on this diagram are edges between these three fields. There is this edge between work teams and communities of practice where incremental innovation is happening. But what we are all interested in, radical innovation, is happening on the edges of social networks or wider society and communities of practice. And this diagram represents how this process of sharing practices, sharing knowledge, seeking knowledge and making sense of things through bubble sharing and different types of processes actually feeds and diffuses throughout society. So this is definitely a source of information for me, and very, very brief blog posts are shared almost daily, 2 minutes to read, and very interesting.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So anybody else got either a question or a resource to share? Jean-Paul.
Yes, I had a question more on the translation side. Thank you, Mike, to show all the good resources from the transition network. I just wanted to know if there is a way to put them very easily translated, maybe in transition network or something like that. I don't know. The Belgium has translated many things, but I don't know if I should find it directly on the transition network side or go on their side, or so this is still a remaining issue.
Yeah, I mean, some hubs have taken the resources and translated them. I think Belgium have done quite a few. What we're also doing at the moment is we're making all the resources much more accessible through having putting them into Google Docs, so then we can share them with anyone who would want to translate them. The problem is at the moment we've been mainly focusing on getting the essential guide to transition translated, which is now in about, I think, 12 different languages. But all the resources, it would be amazing if we could get all of those translated into different languages. And we're trying to, that's something that we're thinking about, how we can make that easily accessible and easy to happen. But yeah, you're right. And it's always worth looking at your hub in your country first to check out if there's a transition hub, because a lot of them will have taken some of the resources and translated them at least.
By the way, if I can add one more point, is if you do a document, it's important to be able sometime to print it. So we still have the problem with the essential guide of transition. I don't remember exactly the term, but it's translated in many languages, but it has been done with an external tool. And this tool is providing a nice translation for the computer. But if we want to print it with special margins that are required to print it on a large scale, it's not possible, because the site where you have put this is paying itself with that, and you have to pay a lot of money to get the printout. So the best solution is to have, in such a format that we can use, modify it in computer, and you see, and it's not possible with this solution currently put in place. So if you want to translate, if you want us to be able to translate and print some of the documents, it's important to take into account the fact that it's possible to do it.
I mean, we no longer use that. That's GMAG you were talking about, but we no longer use that. All the essential guides that are now on the website are PDFs, so you can download any of those and then edit them in a PDF editor. They're not really set up for large-scale printing in the sense of having the sort of margins around them, but you can just print them out as you would any other PDF at the moment. But maybe this is another conversation we can have. You can always email me, Jean-Paul, because we might be able to get into the minutiae of printing and things like that. So.
Yes. Printing is sometimes, if you don't have the margin at the beginning, it's complicated. It's better to have the margin at the beginning. In the tool. Okay, anyway, we can discuss that afterwards.
Yeah. Feel free to email me.
Sounds good feedback. So, any other questions? Any other comments? Any other contributions?
I'm curious who could offer something helpful to me.
Yes, because you're always offering us helpful resources. Someone needs to offer Nenad a helpful resource that he's never seen before. There's a challenge. Oh, Mike, are you taking up the challenge?
I may have one. I don't know. One of the people who I found, it's not so much a resource, but it's a set of ideas is a German sort of social theorist called Nicola, who has done a lot around society and how society developed, and combining systems thinking with a whole other range of philosophical views. And there's a really good short documentary that he produced. He's now dead. This was produced in like the late 80s, which I found really, really good and really interesting. So I could always share that with you. And the other thing,
how do we find that? What do we Google, Mike? Or
I can actually put it in. I'll put it in the
Yes, please do.
in the group chat. And in terms of other stuff, what I found is reading things outside of the general, there's stuff which is very specific about the work that we all do around systems thinking and all that. But I also find quite stimulating occasionally reading novels or other stuff which is sort of which then makes me think about things in a different way. And also watching films and this sort of stuff. So I don't always, I think there's other ways that you can gain with information. And we all know that. I think we all also have people. I have several friends of mine who I know I can go to if I need to test an idea or ask them about a specific question of history or politics or something. So yeah, like you were saying, Nenad, I think of maybe you get that in LinkedIn, but I always think those when you find those people, they're quite good to hold on to as good sources of information.
Excellent. Well, while Mike's looking for his link to share about Nicholas Luhmann, then any other questions, contributions, things that Nenad's never seen before? Okay, Tommy.
Well, I'm not sure if this is really, well, I'll try anyways. So there are ways to basically follow university level courses. Probably you already know that. There are like a couple of websites. I might share it here. And actually I say that because I'm recently following a course about sustainable food production, but with a systemic thinking approach. So it's within those kind of platforms. Mike shared his link. I can share here the other links. One is edx.org. Not sure if anybody knows that, probably. And the other one is Coursera. Most of them are for free. You just have to pay if you want to see it, so it's good. There's two, probably there are like tons others of resources like that they might be useful to check them. They're all like university level courses, and you can find all sorts of things that might be useful.
So as a university course, are they kind of modules then, Tommy? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. Kind of, it depends on the topic, the level, and you can find all sorts of like small course, long course, and there are some university, for example, in the food production systems that they're trying to change somehow the paradigm. So, for example, there's this University of Wageningen from the Netherlands that they're are using this systemic approach in several different aspects of food production, for example. I was interested in that, so it might be useful to share.
Brilliant. Shakhtari, I see that you posted in the chat. Do you want to unmute your microphone and talk, say something? Oh, your mic isn't working. I have to read out what you put in the chat. That you always ask yourself what lens you're looking through, and then actively seek other lenses to look through. So how do other species view the issue? How do other age groups view this issue? How does water experience this, etc.? So that sounds like a good way of getting some really good empathy. Fyodor, did you have your hand up as well?
Yeah, just it's mentioned in my this post, like original bubble sharing from December, but it's kind of buried under a lot of other stuff. For Nenad, everybody wanted to bring your attention to the research by University of Melbourne Business School Asia Pacific Social Impact Center. They're really, really cool, especially Dr. Chris Dembeck. So there are a couple of articles about social entrepreneurship for systemic change. One is called Creating Value for Multiple Stakeholders, and another is called Business Unusual. And there's actually a very useful model that they discovered in Indonesia by studying 55 different organizations trying to deal with complex problems like poverty, which we found very helpful and refreshingly relevant, because a lot of things we see in academia are reductionistic in many ways, and this is really something real for us. So just wanted to share that.
What was the second one? You said business unusual.
Business as unusual, right? So there is, it's a recent article that is right there.
Can you put that link in the chat as well?
Yeah, and I also can send you all PDFs, because I think they want to pay if you want to download it from something, but I have Dr. Dembeck allowed me to share it with anybody who wants to read it. Okay. I can share it with you later. Yeah.
Sorry, Nenad, you've been waiting for ages. Go for it.
Yeah, so I want to thank Mike for this link to the documentary about Nicola Slurman. And this is exactly the example of filtering. If I would stumble upon this video on YouTube, I will probably not watch it. But because Michael recommended it, I'm going to take 45 minutes eventually to watch it. And I'm going to benefit from this because I trust Mike, because we know each other. That's how filtering, real life filtering works. Yeah?
That's quite a heavy responsibility to put on Mike, though, isn't it?
Well, that's what we all do. We follow and read stuff from people that we trust. Yeah? And mentioning this also reminded me of a book I read at the beginning of my transition involvement. I know 9 years ago. Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky. Very interesting, even today.
Yes. Actually, it doesn't have to be a new resource to be really good. Thanks for that link as well. I'd say we always do this after webinars. Tommy will write a blog that has lots of resources on, but I think this blog is going to be particularly rich. So I would advise you, there is a way you can save this chat. There's a button in your chat window which says more, and if you click there you can save the chat. So you might get all of those resources, but also it's also worth going to the Hot Topics page of the Municipalities in Transition website, because from there you'll be able to find the blog which will have all these resources that everybody's been talking about. And yeah, we're just going to start our university here. Let's all do it. As Nenad was saying, we have to take all that time to actually really engage with the resource, but I'm feeling this sense of, well, let's do it. So as we draw to a close, I'm just wondering if there's any final inspiring resources to come out with work, or that people want to ask about or share. Something that's really helped you. Was that your hand up, Tommy, or just a thumbs up? Just a thumbs up. Fyodor, you put something else in the chat. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So it's basically Dr. Dembeck's personal page on the university website that lists his articles that you can search. And you can ask me if you want PDFs of a couple of them, the most recent ones. Yeah, generally that. Yeah, and I guess final thing is also the methodologies, resources that we've been working on is collective narrative methodology. Is a form of harvest that communicates the collective from a World Cafe, for example, is sensing activity, sensing harvest that creates like a blog post, like a fair representation of the collective. So I will also post a link there about collective narrative methodology that we've been using so far.
So by that, what are you talking? Are you talking about after you've done a World Cafe, a way of somehow taking all the different brainstormed information?
Yeah. So instead of like graphic facilitation that is not usually accessible to those who were not part of the conversation because they don't have enough context to understand that, or bullet points like the word abundance, like, and what? Yeah, you talked about abundance. I get it, but I was not in the conversation. What the hell you were talking about? I don't know. So, and if somebody writes a blog post with all this context, it's user-friendly, but it's usually personal bias. Like one person usually applies their own lens to pick what is helpful. So how to, and basically here, encouraging table hosts to actually share stories about the conversations they've been having as though they are sharing it with cameras and with the world right there, right, with like journalists. And then harvesting that, then clustering, transcribing, clustering ideas, because in the World Cafe, due to cross-pollination, usually ideas are present in multiple reports. And usually, like when you just see the transcript or listen to the reports, you get lost in all the different pieces. It's like you need to do defragmentation, like in a hard drive. And then you arrange these clusters so that it makes a story. And then you edit that while not taking any idea, even slightest idea out of it, and not bringing any other ideas in it to keep the integrity of the collective, but making it readable for people who are not part of the conversation. So just a description of how we've been doing that. And we found it very helpful to track even changes in narratives. Do a World Cafe at the beginning, a World Cafe at the end, and see how priorities change. So, yeah.
Very interesting. So just any final thoughts or questions? I was, Juan, go for it.
Thank you, Nicola. Well, it's more just a question for all of you, or yeah, a final question maybe. This is the last hot topic webinar we do in this series, and Nicola, Tommy, and I, we have been we have been facilitating and coordinating many different webinars with plenty of incredible presenters like all of you, and in a way, all this is a collective collaborative experiment. The project right now, it's also ending its first phase. It will probably continue, definitely, that's our aim. And also with the community of practice, we will need to see how it evolves, which are the next steps, and so on. So because we talk about different sources of inspiration, I like to put here on the, and here there's people with a lot of expertise on communities of practice and so on. I like to, I don't know, like to ask ideas, and of course there's people that have been following us in different webinars. So ideas for continuation of the community of practice, maybe other communities where we could get inspired, other sources, even platforms or tools. For example, we're using Conference, because Nenad, you mentioned that. It's true that later it has some changes and that affected all of us a little bit, but it was thanks to you, no, that we decided to use that. So I don't know, there's anything any of you would like to suggest that could be helpful for the continuation, talking about sources? And bye, Sharon.
Oh, Jean-Paul, go for it.
Yes, hello Juan. Yes, in fact, for me, I can just talk about my concern currently. I am learning more and more, even if I don't benefit or take time to read all what Nenad provide me, the community of practice for. I mean, I have a huge, but I go also, I'm in contact also with the commons, with municipalist movement now, and with many, many things. So I have a lot of things, and it's great, basically. But the problem I have is that in the local initiative, I have a hard time to transmit this, or even to have them interested in. It's like there is a treasure somewhere, and I cannot explain then the treasure is just there, just be interesting a little bit, or that this is my concern now. So if you have an answer or some answer, it's fine.
Who has an answer? I'm thinking, oh, well, amazingly, Nenad has an answer.
Not an answer, maybe based on my experience. First, for Juan, I think community of practice is relationships, not platforms. And by my experience, and it is also proven by studies, video conversations are the best way to develop relationships if you are remote. What's better than that is in-person meetings, but that's not practically doable. So I would recommend just to continue with video conversations, not only in this structured way, but also ad hoc way about some small projects and collaborations that might be even experimental, etc. Eventually, it gets to people self-organizing using video and other communication tools. And also, the other take on that, it's not about which communication and collaboration tools we use, it's about having a habit of staying in communication. Once the habit of staying in communication is in place, then anything people know how to use will be used. Yeah? That's my experience. Yeah? And for Jean-Paul, I guess people like you and people that are connecting translocally, transnationally, globally, are doing that based on some kind of a personal inclination. So instead of focusing on trying to motivate people that want to do things in their local physical environment, immediate physical environment, maybe it's better to try to identify people that are intrinsically interested in this kind of network weaving and work with them. Yeah. So that's my experience. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the case that even if they don't want to necessarily follow your interest in a particular piece of information, Jean-Paul, they are actually benefiting from the fact that you have taken on that knowledge and you may apply it in some situation that comes up with your local group or your hub, because you've engaged with it. So, you know, when it's needed, it will be there. The information will be there. Fyodor?
Yeah, so just wanted to comment that that's exactly, you know, the spirit of bubble sharing and bubble surfing, to eliminate this awkwardness of offering somebody a resource and expecting them to necessarily use it, versus like learning something and feeling obligation to actually use it or study it, and which limits our capacity, and we just say no, right? But instead we can engage like lightly, and I know situations where people came back to something they learned like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it never caught until like that moment in their life. It's like, oh my God, there's some I vaguely remember something, and they got it, oh my God, and then that fit what they were doing like 5 years from that moment. So just loosening that attachment and playing with this randomness.
Great. Well, thank you all for taking part in this webinar. I've really enjoyed the rich treat of all the resources that we've heard about, and yes, was so thrilled to see all the things that came up in Nenad's top 5 of mystery, and I think there's been some fantastic, I think the blog post, I'm going to really enjoy looking through those and reminding myself of all these things that we can go and look at. And before we finish, I want to also, because Shakhtari doesn't have a mic, They are saying, in my experience, everything is relationships. I can't think of any aspect of life on this planet that doesn't meet that description. Yes, staying connected honours all participants. It says, you are worth my time and effort, and that is a great honour. It also says your input is valuable. I find making local events fun creates that relationship that then opens so many doors in so many ways. I think that's really great, and I completely agree. And what a great note to finish on. So, oh yeah, thank you all so much for your time and all your wisdom and your knowledge, and thank you so much. See you all soon. Goodbye.
Bye to everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nenad.